Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. From video usage to engagement to impact, the next frontier in video metrics, which is sponsored by Alexander Street. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to academic librarians and the library community in general. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you will see a chat panel, which you may use to submit questions or comments. At the end of the presentation, we will take a few minutes to answer your questions, so please feel free to submit them throughout. If you lose audio or would like to change how you are connected to it, look under the participants box on the right-hand side of your screen and click on the phone question mark icon. Please also note that today's program is being recorded, and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. And now I'm very pleased to introduce David Parker and Pete Ciffetti. David is the Senior Vice President of Editorial and Licensing at Alexander Street. He has 14 years experience in the e-learning and library product space. At Alexander Street, David utilizes his skills in digital publishing to launch multimedia business resources with e-learning functionality. He pairs traditional business materials with previously undiscovered content to deliver exceptional digital era teaching and learning products built to empower faculty and students in new ways. He serves on the Publishers Advisory Board for SIPX and writes a column for Against the Grain that explores blurring lines in content, services, and responsibilities within libraries and the companies that serve them. Pete Ciffetti has been a technologist in the industry for over 25 years, working for companies that produce library information products. He has held senior technical positions at Silver Platter, Knowledge Site, H.W. Wilson, and Credo Reference. Pete has an ALB in Natural Sciences / Computer Science from Harvard University, and he gets inspired working with librarians, many of who are early adopters, passionately service-oriented, and accomplish amazing things with limited resources. At this point, we are ready to get started, so I will turn the floor over to you, David.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone who's on the line. I'm always impressed with the turnout for these events. This is the third one we've done in the past 2 years as we've explored changes in video distribution and video usage measurement. Today we're going to talk about how we, Alexander Street, are evolving as a video provider focusing on different ways to measure both the raw usage of content, but also how users engage with it, and then how video impacts the learner and impacts the efficacy of the faculty member using video. Pardon me, I'm advancing the slide. Mark, the button isn't working for me.
All right.
Can you advance the slide?
Yes, I can do that.
Wait a minute, it just went. Pardon me. Sorry about that, everybody. Minor technical glitch to start. So today's agenda, we're going to start by talking a little bit about what's going on with engagement measures in the video space. Video distribution is newer than, of course, other media types, and the engagement measures that we're seeing come into the landscape are quickly evolving. We're going to leap from there into a discussion about how and what we can measure and how this leads to insights about how video impacts, again, the learner and the professor delivering the lesson. And then how can we develop this further? How can we take it into the new frontier we reference in our title? And then, of course, questions from you. So first, a bit about Alexander Street. Many of you I know are very familiar with us. We're a 16-year-old company that's been dedicated to bringing previously unpublished resources to the scholarly and learning community via the library. Our history is deeply rooted in identifying previously unpublished content, digitizing it, and working with scholarly communities to apply indexing and discovery to that content that make it all the more meaningful for the research agenda and for the teaching agenda. We were the first company in the library space to offer streaming audio. We actually beat iTunes by 6 months, and we were the first to bring streaming video in. YouTube, however, beat us there by about 6 months, but we've been active with streaming video now for more than 10 years. And you can see that we were recently acquired by ProQuest. This has been great because it's been giving Pete and myself an opportunity to dive in and focus much more deeply on the evolution of our video platform and the way we measure impact, engagement, and much of what you'll hear about today has been facilitated by this new freedom we have as a ProQuest company to focus more significantly around our video products. So how did we get involved? This is a story I love to tell. It dates back to summer 2014. I was asked to speak at an ALA consortia managers meeting outside of the ALA event, or run parallel to the ALA event. And at the time, there were two major points that were really converging and influencing the way people were talking about measuring video and usage. The first was PDA, or patron-driven acquisition, was really finally beginning to take root with video. You all know that it's been around with ebooks for quite some time, but video, it's a more new phenomenon. And by the summer of 2014, it was becoming pretty prevalent. A lot of libraries were made aware of it, signing up with it, and beginning to use it. And of course, the other point is an ongoing point we've been dealing with since the financial crisis, and some would argue before, that is declining budgets and the need to be more careful about collection management and resource allocation. What happened in this meeting with the consortia managers, though, is these 2 points converged into a discussion that devolved almost entirely into a debate about, or a discussion about, cost per use. And as the conversation progressed, I could see several librarians in the room, myself as a distributor, vendor, becoming concerned that we were missing discussion about and concern about impact. And when I say impact, I mean those uses of video that can't be measured in cost per use. For example, if a professor selects a ethnographic film video and makes that the backbone of her course for a week, and 500 students sit in an auditorium and watch that film, how do you attribute a value to that one viewing of the film commensurate to its impact? Or another example, a student who's having a really hard time understanding the concept of cellular mitosis finds a great 3-minute video on our platform, watches that video, and gains an insight they could never gain from reading about it, and does exceptionally well on an exam the following day. I would contend it's pretty difficult to confine the value to that 3 minutes to simply what that cost per view, what was that cost per view. So it was a heated discussion, and we found ourselves going back and forth between cost per use as a key measure, other ways we could capture impact. And I think by the end, we all agreed that both matter. Cost per use matters and impact matters, but we didn't really know how to capture impact. And we had just nascent ideas about how we might do this. So it became the backbone of my next column in Against the Grain. And I provocatively said in the column, you know, measuring ROI, or cost per use, or return on investment with video, how do you do it, really? Can you? And it was one of the most, I guess, provocative pieces I wrote for Against the Grain, because I got 20 or 30 responses with people, you know, asking me what we were thinking about at Alexander Street in terms of measuring impact and also in measuring engagement. And that started us down a path of really thinking hard about what our platform tracks, what our platform might track, how we could work with different scholarly communities to convert that data into meaningful impact measures that would allow you as librarians to balance one measure of cost per use with another measure, and that is how is the video impacting the efficacy of the teaching process and the effectiveness of the learning process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete, our master technician, who takes these wild questions I come up with and runs with them and adds all new dimension to them.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to begin with our basic thesis. You saw our agenda and what we're going to be talking about. But I want to sort of, as I go forward, you'll see that I'm touching on different angles of the concept of usage and of engagement and of impact. So I'll try to sort of carefully position those three related concepts into the presentation. So our engagement starts with this. If you've been in the industry since at least the 1990s, you've seen quite an evolution from the kind of usage tracking systems we put in place prior to Counter. Back in the 90s, I had built two of these systems, actually, and then Counter came along and gave us a little bit of a more rational way to approach usage so that librarians could aggregate information from the different platforms. And then more recently, now we've seen with big data capabilities, people diving more into analytics, trying to understand at a deeper level what's going on with the material. And then from those analytics, trying to assess some kind of impact that those materials are having on their community. So what I'm saying here is that with deeper knowledge about user engagement at the item level, we can begin to understand how the impact of these materials, what the materials are having on the user, and the value to you in those investments. In the coming slides, we're going to talk about what we mean by user engagement and impact and how that data about engagement leads to insight about impact. First, I'm going to sort of survey where things stand now, so everyone's starting at the same point. If you're a user of Counter reports, there's a standard report called the Media Report 1, and this is what most video providers would be expected to provide to their customers. And it gives you a kind of, over various reporting periods by month and by collection, it gives you the total number of playbacks for all the media in those collections. So this allows you to see which collections are being used, but it doesn't reveal what titles are being used within those collections. And so that's, you know, one view that we're giving the customer base about what's going on with their video collections. In our demand-driven models, we've been tracking usage at the item level to support those models because there, what we're looking for and what the customer is looking for is what are the titles that are being used and for how long, and because that's going to affect their collection development decisions. And so this is a report you're looking at that we show to our PDA customers about the activity that's been going on with their titles over the period of time that they've been engaged with the PDA program. And you'll see that we're counting the playbacks and the total duration, and then they're using that information to decide what to purchase. But again, it tells you what titles were used and how long, but it doesn't actually tell you what type of usage those titles received from the user. There's really no indication of engagement here, just pretty much playbacks is all you're seeing. So it's, again, one of the more basic insights into impact, and what we want to look a little more now is what's the next level of depth we can get into in terms of collecting data about the user engagement. So before I get there, what I want to do, again, in a sort of way of laying out what's going on or in the broader industry and where we're standing, there has been for a couple of years a NISO working group, set of working groups, working on recommended practices for Altmetrics. And you see there are 3 working groups here that have been already delivering some of the recommendations that they've been working on. And well, it gives us a little bit of an insight into what vendors and users of this information can do with this data. It provides some definitions that we can use as a baseline in our own discussion. So among the outputs of this effort have been from Working Group A, a list of 8 different persona types who would engage and benefit from Altmetrics. And I'll define what I mean by Altmetrics coming up here. So they're broadly defined. I've kind of given us a brief summary to fit on the slide here. It's what we mean by altmetrics, and it's assessments derived from researchers' use of scholarly material. If you actually look at the broader definition in the working group's output, you'll see it's defined as the digital collection, creation, and use of multiple forms of assessment that are derived from the activity engagement among diverse stakeholders and scholarly outputs in the research ecosystem. So that's kind of a broad. It's broad. It doesn't really exclude or define what we mean by multiple forms of assessment. It leaves that definition up to the providers of that information, and you'll see that that's actually quite broad. They're also making an attempt at defining impact, and then what they're saying there in a certain way is that impact is really what is the influence these scholarly outputs are having as manifested by the attention the world is giving it. So what you see in the implementations of these altmetric systems are a lot of their data is based on user mentions in social media, in blogs, and on news sites. So from Twitter, for example, they're counting the number of tweets that contain a DOI or a journal landing page. They get data from Facebook, and from there they're looking at the number of shares and likes and comments on the journal landing page for the article, and that will include private activity. From sites like PLOS, they're counting the number of comments from the article page, comments from users. In WordPress, they're looking at blog posts that people are doing that mention this material. At Mendeley, they're looking at individual user and group readership counts of the items that are cited in Mendeley. And so these data are being aggregated by persistent identifiers across the different platforms that they're getting information from. And so for impact, another thing that we can say is that they're also recommending that we don't use the raw data as the only measure of impact. Really, they're trying to advise that we combine the qualitative information with some quantitative information about, sorry, the other way around. They combine the quantitative information with some qualitative information about what the impact these materials might be having. Because an uncritical process for scholarly impact, because the attention paid to a research output or the rate of the output's dissemination may be unclear until it combined with the qualitative information. Another thing that the working groups provided was a definition of what we mean by these data providers and aggregators. So the data providers are the platforms that are the source of the events that we're using in the altmetrics. So these would be, Twitter and Facebook would be included in those as the data providers. And the data aggregators are the organizations that are crawling those sites to pull together and combine using their standard identifiers or URLs, total aggregation, total impact, if you will, total mentions in these sites for each of the materials that they can then report back at the item level. So I can point out that it doesn't cover what we think is possible. Existing implementations do not cover, at this point anyways, non-STM material. And it doesn't integrate with the majority of the publisher platforms know about what's going on in terms of user engagement. So most of the material that they're including in their engagement are what's available through APIs and public sites like Twitter and Facebook. But as we all know, there's a lot of engagement that goes on within the platforms that these materials are published on. And I would say it really doesn't provide much insight into impact. Certainly it's an angle of impact, you could say. Certainly if something's being talked a lot about in these public spaces, that it's having more of an impact than something that's not being talked about. But it really is lacking a little bit in what I would call the engagement dimension. We don't really know what users are doing with that material at this point, other than that they're talking about it, which again is important, but I don't think the whole picture. So if you look at the arc of altmetric standardization, you can see, from my perspective, it's sort of following the same arc of what basic usage statistics went through before Counter. So in the beginning, there were independent usage systems from the different platforms that were difficult, if not impossible, to aggregate. So Counter came along and made that, defined some ways for us to collect information. They first defined how to collect that for journal information, because obviously there was a lot of money being spent on that type of material. And again, it was mostly about science, technology, and medicine. Not that they limited that definition, but those were the first adopters of these standards to make it possible to kind of aggregate it across the entire journal collections in those spaces. not every data provider participated at the same level. So counter and efforts after that kind of got us more aligned in terms of what we were collecting and how we're collecting, and then helped us avoid the metrics and the dimensions being provider specific. So I would say that counter really, it wasn't what got us going. What got us going really was the usage statistics platforms that we had all independently built, and counter showed up as a way to kind of make sense of all of that. And I feel like we're in the same space we are with Altmetrics. You know, there's a lot of different ways to think about Altmetrics, and how the different publishers and data providers and the data aggregators are providing ways to inspect that information and report on it. And the recommendations aren't really trying to squeeze it into one set of definitions that might be specific to a certain type of data, but they're really just trying to codify the codes of practice. You know, among those codes of practice, for example, would be that the data we're collecting is transparent and auditable, that we're saying very clearly how it is we're collecting this data and providing mechanisms for independent review of the accuracy of that data. All right, so we're going to move on. I'm going to talk about how what user engagement with video is and what it could be. And as I go through this, you'll see some of the different ideas we have there. And 4 or 5 slides from now, I'll be asking you a question in a poll question about the kinds of engagement you think would be important to capture, so that you could then help, you know, analyze that data and turn it into an insight about impact. We have an opportunity really to shape a lot of what's going on here, because there's pretty wide open territory in the area of video. Because most of the attention has been paid to journal material and to public sites, when you start talking about non-journal material inside the publisher sites themselves and what we can do to help, you know, create the total picture, you'll find, if you agree with me, there's a lot we can do there. So going back to our thesis, I'm saying that user engagement is a key to understanding impact. So we have to define what we mean by user engagement. And so the platforms that the users are using have to provide means of engaging the user, which may sound like an obvious statement, but you are going to see differences in the kinds of engagement that users can have with media material. So we need to not only understand what's possible, but what's also common. So just on the following slides, to just show some of the ways that we're engaging the user. So users can isolate sections of a video and make a clip, and the clip can have a title and a description. And when they create that clip, they get to decide whether to make it private or public. And so we're thinking of this in the broader terms of an annotation. So once you've come in, a user has come in and made a clip, they're adding a lot of value at some level to the video, because they're helping other users find interesting sections of what may be a very long work. And we do some of this work ourselves in our production department. We'll go and find teachable moments inside canonical works and make segments around them so that those teachable moments become more discoverable. And when users are finding those as the starting point for their user experience, then, you know, we're getting a sense that they're getting closer to something that might be really related to their research or study. Users can also embed the video, and this is an important thing to dwell on, and I'll come back to some concepts that this introduces. But with an embed, a user can they'll get from us a little chunk of HTML code that they can put into a learning management system or into a LibGuide. Maybe they're writing a blog and they want to reference that item, or maybe it's a research article that's going to get published. And recent developments on our platforms have made it possible so that when you embed a link to a link or either the video in itself into a page that you are the author of, the destination of that video will now work for everyone, because if the user has full access, they'll see that. If they don't have full access, they'll see either a preview or a citation of the item, and maybe some related items to that video. So our Altmetrics exploit this from the perspective of what we call a curated view. So if you look at all of the traffic that comes to our site, some of it comes from Google, some of it comes from catalogs that people have loaded our MARC records, some of it come obviously from searches that people do within the site and find material. But in this case, what we're getting traffic from is users who have taken it upon themselves to kind of promote this material in whatever other context that they're the author of. And my perspective is that's different than everything else in terms of the kind of broad or bulk awareness that we're creating through discovery, because they're adding some value here and bringing traffic to the site. And so we want to sort of keep track of that and give them credit for that effort. And if you compare this to the kind of tweets and retweets that you see being measured by systems like altmetrics.com, what the publisher platforms can know is how often those tweets brought the users back to the platform. So it's not just that it's getting talked about, but that publicity is also returning users back to these materials, and so they can see them firsthand themselves. The next type of engagement I'm going to talk about is sharing. So this is a button that you can press on our video player page where you can send this to any of the destinations that the Add This widget allows you to send to. And these include all of the popular share sites like Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter. And so like what you see, when somebody has made a tweet or a retweet and then that's referenced a journal article, we know that this is happening on the platform side. So it's a sort of sending event as opposed to the receiving event. And while users don't always need our help to make a tweet, if they use this feature to help them, then we can keep track of that and make that part of the aggregation of the metrics that are happening on the other side when people are actually viewing the tweets and coming back to the video. Users can also cite the material, so they can add this to a bibliographic reference manager, and we support all of the popular platforms. And you'll see that compared to what's going on with Altmetrics now, there's a parallel here because Mendeley is a provider of altmetric data, and they're able to reveal to the outside world how often a given item is on a reader's list. So that's an important sort of trailing indicator of that this material is popular. But by the same token, we can provide that same information on the producer side, and even for systems that might not be publicly available. So if you're citing this material to a local database like those that Zotero makes possible, then we can count that too. So you kind of get again a broader picture of the kind of engagement that's going on with this material. Another type of engagement is adding to a playlist. And for us, this is a really important type because on our platform, users can annotate and share playlists with any of the other 2.5 million users of the platform. And playlists often act as more than just a convenient way of playing a lot of material, and they're acting as lists of reserved materials, lists of test resources, bibliographies, and other essential components of learning and research. So when you make a playlist, obviously putting a lot of effort into those, and you're giving it a title, you're giving it a description, you're carefully choosing the members of that playlist, and then you share that. And then we can know how often that happens. How often did you make and share a playlist? But also how often that playlist then resulted in the user discovering that material. So we in our Altmetrics count how often each item in the playlist is played. And that's, for us, again, a different type of view. If you just go back to the counter media reports, certainly if something's played through a playlist, it counts as a view the same way as if it had been played outside of a playlist. But by being played inside of a playlist, we know we've engaged the user at a slightly more detailed level. There's something special about this item that they added it to a playlist. And then another type of engagement is just search within. So users can come to the transcript of the video and look for material inside of it through keyword searching. And the transcript and the ability to scan it and search within it and jump to scenes containing your matches means that an hour or more of video can be consumed very quickly by a student or researcher, much faster than watching the whole video looking for a certain scene that might be mentioning a topic they're interested in. And knowing that the user is engaged with a video at this level, they're sort of diving into it. So it's more than just if they had found the video, pressed play, and sat back and watched it. We call this a lean-in experience. And so when you're leaning into the video, it'd be nice to know how often that's happening. And again, that's just another one of our alt metrics that we're capturing. And then finally, we want to get some qualitative feedback from the user. So one of the things we're launching in the near future is pop-ups that will show in the video that ask the user to rate the video with 1 to 5 stars, or maybe indicate to us, why they were using this material. Was it something they shown in class? Did they need it for a research project, et cetera? And they can provide sort of other write-in information about how this material helped or didn't, for that matter. And that gives us a little bit of a qualitative picture to go on top of the quantitative data. So these slides are really only a subset of what we already collect in the engagement activities, and I don't think we've exhausted the possibilities here. So one of the things we're exploring is more interactive videos, Q&A with the user in selected titles that will demonstrate learning outcomes. And so while we may not have a lot of interactive titles, certainly the ones that we do have and the kinds of engagement they have with the user will give us an insight to how that extra engagement helps them use that material in a learning setting. All right, so now we're going to come time to ask our first question of the audience. What type of metrics do you wish you had to gauge the engagement with and the impact of video? We'll give a few minutes here. I'd like you to perhaps answer your top 2 choices. You might find a lot of these are interesting, but if there's 1 or 2 that really stand out, if you could select those, that'll give us a little bit of a steer towards what to focus on as we develop these concepts.
So it looks like we're getting a good number of folks responding to the poll. We'll give you just another minute or 2 to get your responses in, and then we will share those out.
Yeah, I didn't mention, if you have something in the other category, just please add it to the chat. All right, very interesting results. So it seems like there's a number C there. What kind of user, faculty, student, staff is using the video, and then we move from there to kind of a tie between the next 2 or 3. And but this is very helpful, and the other categories are also going to help us. We did, David did. We have a strong group of video advisors and other contacts in the industry, and we asked them similar questions. David sent out a survey of use cases, and so what we'll share here are some of their inputs as we got feedback from them. So Winifred Metz from UNC really wanted to know what really constitutes a view, and I think what that comes from is how the reports gather views, and items that are in multiple collections is one way where sometimes the type of view is not clear. And then also, if you look in how PDA programs work, we're trying to figure out, is the view a significant one? And so that often has to do with the duration of the view, or how often, how many people are using it. Is it one view showing to many users? And again, she, I think, echoed the primary, the popular item on the poll: who is doing the viewing? The faculty, staff, or grad student, and from what department? And Patchner from Duke University wanted to know how much of a film a student watches, and were they assigned one scene, and did they not have the time to watch the whole film, and getting feedback from faculty about how they choose the films they assign in the class, and whether that the features of these platforms has transformed that selection process. So there's a lot of help what we're getting from the user community and the customer community about where this goes, and there'll be opportunity for anybody else in terms of you'll see coming forward to help us kind of steer us in the right direction here. All right, so we're going to change topics. So we've covered a little bit about what we mean by assessment. What we mean by user engagement. And then now we're going to switch into a discussion about how do we turn that knowledge of user engagement into an understanding of impact. So many of you will have heard of this apocryphal quotation, often attributed to Chairman Mao, but in 1972, Zhou Enlai made some comment to this effect when asked about the impact of what was then a recent 1968 French uprising. And it was misreported as being a comment about the French Revolution in 1789, and then over time mistakenly relayed as having been said by Mao. And so while despite the fact that we can't marvel at the depth of the meaning attributed to the apocryphal version of this story, we can say this, that impact is an elusive concept. And at the Society of Scholarly Publishing this year, where altmetrics were widely presented and discussed, it was very clear that funding providers, funding spenders, research evaluators, researchers themselves, pretty much of all types, said they really wanted to know the impact of their research on society and on future research. And as I mentioned earlier, that this has obviously had an impact on the recommended practices that NISO is promulgating. So they really are encouraging us to combine the insight revealed by the quantitative altmetric data with the sort of qualitative data and with the passing of time to really understand the impact of research. And even for everyday usage, of the impact on learning and information literacy and the other missions of the academic community. So this is especially true in fields that we are strong in, like the social sciences, the arts and the humanities, where the impacts are made over decades. I think it's widely reported that even in the medical community, it's been shown that it can take an average 17 years for a new practice to be adopted by the community of practitioners. So if we recall our earlier slide, we said impact could be defined as the broad influence of scholarly outputs as manifested by the attention the world gives it. I would say that that's only one dimension of impact. That's what I would call the outside looking in. But there was also the internal conversation among the participants, the people who are using these platforms and sharing materials and commenting on them within the publishing platforms where they're first discovered. That might be the inside looking out and the actions of the users who are doing the engagement. So what I will show next is some of the types of reports you can get out of the altmetric data that we've been gathering. And this is going to be from our Google Analytics. We've been working on a project to migrate this data to another analytics platform and make this data available to customers with some standard reports that you will be able to see and hopefully make use of. So I'm going to go through a drill down process where I'll start at the top level and show you how to refine the analysis. So the first report shown here is the aggregate of all engagement metrics over a period of time. And so what you're seeing here is that in this period, the main engagement type was the use of our clips. That's what we call our clips annotations, and we count how often times they're used. And we see that 24,000 plus views of these annotations occurred over this period of time. Playlist items played and items extracted also in the top three. So what we mean by extracted here is we have a ability, once you've selected an item, you can email it to yourself, or you can download it, the metadata for it, or you can save it to your computer. So that's what we mean by extracted. Number 5 on the list is the annotated. That's the other side of the annotation view. That's somebody creating a clip, and they may create it for themselves. They may create it in a shared situation. That's up to them. But if they've created one, that's another indication of engagement. So you'll notice in the middle here, there's an ability to add a secondary dimension. So here, the primary dimension is the type of engagement and counts for each one. If I make the title of the item the secondary dimension, what I get here is the ability to drill down and see the engagement by title. And by default, Google Analytics will sort those by the most engaged with items to the top. So this gives you a view of what are the really popular items when viewed not just from what's been viewed, but how users have engaged. Because you'll notice in this particular report that I've prepared here, I did not include views. Views for me are already, they're another type of engagement, obviously, and I could add them in. But I'm kind of interested to see who's diving into the material, who's using it, putting it in playlists, making clips, adding it to their bibliographic citation reference manager. So that's something that you could aggregate with the other metrics that we're saving and provide even broader pictures of how much the material is being engaged with. But this is just sort of a focused view. And then you'll see that the titles are hyperlinked. If I dive down into the next level, I get the picture of engagement for that given title. So what I think I've chosen here is a Ken Burns film called The Gift. And it shows that over this period of time, 269 users, 269 times has the clip been viewed by 98 different sessions. And then it's been played in 3 playlists. A couple of people have emailed it to themselves, and then another person made a clip for it, and another session we had it added to a playlist. So you kind of get, again, a per title view of the engagement. So that's just a picture. Again, there's a lot more you can do with this analytic data, combining the different dimensions and metrics and doing a lot of data science around what's going on with the titles. And we wouldn't expect librarians to kind of really come in all the time looking at this kind of detailed level. But if you've got people who are analyzing the impact of information on the community, this is obviously going to be interesting from that perspective. I see we're getting some questions. We're almost at our Q&A session, so we will be answering your questions as we get to that point. But I have one question for you. This is our second question for the audience. So we've had a look at the qualitative data. What kinds of well, we've had a look at the quantitative data. What kinds of qualitative data would you use in combination with this qualitative data to really kind of gauge its impact? And so here's, again, a set of options that you might consider. If you have another idea, please enter that into the chat, and we'll give a couple of minutes for this question to get answered.
And this is Mark. I would just encourage folks, if you haven't yet started the poll, to give it a start, and we will wrap it up in just a moment.
Okay, so are we ready to move on? There we go. The results here: faculty student satisfaction with the available resources showed up as #1, and again, kind of a tie for the second for 2 or 3 other items. Again, very, very important. I wondered about E myself. We have related items that we show next to every item, like a video, and we worked hard to make those the most relevant related items, and we're wondering if there's a relationship between the canonical work and how much engagement goes on with the items that are related. What you'll see, we're just as interested in some of these metrics, not only from what it reveals about the investments you're making in materials, but also in the design of the platform itself. We can as we get more insight into what kind of engagements are working, we can focus those and make sure that those are easy to use and readily identifiable to the user. But there's a lot of other things we can do as we learn about types of engagement to kind of add other types of engagement and include those in the metrics. All right, just a couple more slides. We'll move on. We're kind of wrapping up here, getting ready to the questions, but we're going to talk about where to go from here. And so we're going to launch access to these reports at the customer level in January. And we would like to engage the community in helping us define what are the appropriate dimensions, and in fact, in light of the fact that the types of engagement with video are often different than the types of engagement you have with other material, and then how to assess that impact. What information do we need to combine with that quantitative information? So we need to think about how this will project across multiple providers, especially for non-exclusive content, because one of the things that the humanities and the sciences and the arts and social sciences have that don't have compared to some of the science technical is the kind of prolific standard identifiers that we can use. And that is something that maybe can be corrected over time. But until something like that emerges, combining this information across different platforms might take a while. And really, we need to learn how to promote these best practices for combining it with the qualitative data. So I do want another quick question, just a few minutes. If you have an idea that isn't already expressed in the chat comment, and you would like to have us get in touch with you, and you have some ideas on the type of metrics that would help you assess the impact of the material on your community, we'd be glad to contact you. And the same as if you want to look at this reporting system that we're making available and comment on that, there's an opportunity to do that. So just give you a second to chime in here, and then we'll wrap up.
All right, we'll just give folks one more minute here to respond to the poll question before we move on.
Awesome turnout. Thanks, folks. I'll just wrap up talking a little bit, about our thesis that measuring user engagement leads to insight and impact. And we talked about the evolution of statistics and standards defining the opportunity, and then we showed the types of engagement possible with and sometimes often unique to media materials. And we showed how we're collecting that data into analysis tools, and then we talked about where to go from here and how to work together. So we'll wrap up with any questions or comments and open it up to to David as well for the rest of the panel.
Great. So this is Mark from ACRL and Choice. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and we will start getting to those right now. So we've got a couple. Let me look at my list here. From Charlie, who asks, how would a library actually use the data in a practical sense to drive future purchases, for example? And he clarifies that with the engagement data. So could you talk a little bit about that for a moment?
Yeah, I think one of the more obvious ways was just as a supplemental data to the kind of view reports that you see at the PDA title level. So if you're using a demand-driven model for making your purchase decisions, then we can give you the basic view information, but we can also give you the engagement to see, there might be 2 or 3 titles that might have similar views, but one or the other are getting more engagement with the community. They're being used in playlists, or they're being, user feedback has indicated that they've been shown in class. So those, obviously, that kind of qualitative information might help tilt the balance in one direction or another. I think really, when you're talking about engagement across lots of titles, you want some kind of convenient report there that shows you the top end titles, and that's where the reports that we're launching in January all have that characteristic and make it easy to see really not only the total engagement at the title level, but what are the titles that really are making an impact for the different types of engagement. So maybe some of the things that we're adding into our total engagement, like how often it was cited, might be one thing, but how often it was added to a playlist might mean something else to you. There's different qualities to these types of engagement. So if there's one or another that speaks to you more about having really needs that material is important to your users, then you can focus on that specific metric. I don't know if you have anything to add, David, to that question.
The only thing I would add, I think, Pete, you captured that very well. The one small piece I would add to it is that, like with most content types, content used for the classroom or for research applications, it tends to have this sort of long tail, meaning most of the use gets aggregated at the very top of the tail, and as you move down that tail, you see less and less use. But the impact or meaning of that use, again, can't be simply caught in its cost per use. It needs to be balanced with other data points that tell you about how much impact the content may have had. So if I'm a librarian trying to justify a spend on, let's say, a PDA program or a large aggregation video subscription product, I want to be able to look at something in comparison to the cost per use or to augment the cost per use numbers, especially when I'm having to justify purchases the higher up I go into the echelons of university management. Being able to show the impact of the content will help understand why lower use content still has a lot of meaning.
Great, thank you for the responses there. We've got another question for you from Susan, who asks about the share function. And she says the share function is about sharing the citation for the video, not the full video itself. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so you're sharing, you get to share effectively a link back to the video, and you can, whether you add that to a bookmark or share it as a tweet or post it to Facebook, pretty much the kind of material being shared is the same, a reference to the item with a link back to it. But now that we've launched a more open system where the citation level information is available on all items, there's a preview available on all videos, and then if you arrive at if you follow that link and you happen to be recognized as a paying customer, then you get the full access. So it's a more user-friendly experience than if they were just to be greeted with a paywall. And in some of those cases, many of that material is available on a single title sale basis. So if it's another, if it's a faculty at another institution who may not have purchased that video, sees that it's been very heavily used by one of the, another institution that they're monitoring, they might, make the choice to include that item in their collection as well. And I would say the same thing about embedding. So sharing and embedding are, really just two different ways of advertising the availability of some material on the platform. So in an embedding situation, it might be a LibGuide or some other page you're the author of. You can actually embed the experience right in that page. They don't have to come to our platform. They can see the video on your page. Now, if the user who visits that page isn't a member of an institution that has full access, they will see the same thing that the share button offers, which is, a citation page about the video, some related items to it, and then options for how they can get their hands on the full view if they're really interested.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, David, or would you like to let it stand?
I think Pete covered it.
Great, great. All right, so we've got another question from Charlie who asks, is Counter working on any standards for engagement data across platforms? And could you speak to that, or do you have the answer to that question, Pete?
Well, the answer is I don't know, so that's simple. I think certainly what NISO is doing has been receiving a lot of attention. So and some of the people from Counter I think were involved in that, members of the working groups. And I can't say whether that's going to influence yet whether the reports will be standardized. I think the kind of standardization that's been the hallmark of Counter is taking really specific definitions of the type of use and making sure that we're all counting that type of use the same way. What is a search? What is a view, record view? What is a playback? That type of thing. When you start getting into altmetrics, the data tends to be a little fuzzier in terms of the kind of engagement that's going on, and not every vendor may offer that same kind of engagement. So I think we still have to catch up. We have to go through the NISO process and start to develop practices within the industry about what's important. And this is where the user feedback, the community feedback comes really helpful here, because we want to be capturing the right types of engagement, counting it in a transparent way, making it possible for people to either view reports that we make available or even pull the data down so they can do some data science on their own. But recognizing that not everybody needs to do that for every source of material that they have, that eventually what they'll want is an aggregate picture of that. And that's where I think Counter comes in. And so we have to kind of walk before we run here. And Counter, when we get to the point where altmetrics are standardized by Counter, we'll have developed the concept a lot further than where it is now, I think.
Interesting, yeah. We've got another question here from Michael, and Michael asks, what findings do you have regarding the impact of video at a learning or course experience level? Could you talk about that for a moment?
Maybe, I don't know if you want to start with this one. I'll add a little bit, I was saying to David, really what we're doing is collecting data at this point and trying to collect the right type of data. I can't say that I personally have done a lot of across the different customers who are developing this data, doing my own assessment of the impact. And we haven't put the data in the hands of the customers yet, and so we haven't gotten any feedback really because of that in terms of how they're experiencing the data, helping them assess that. So that's really why the last question on the presentation was inviting people to either help us define the kinds of engagement and the metrics that we're saving to allow them to do that, or getting early access to the report so that we can see if they're working for their use cases.
Mark, could you restate the question? I had trouble hearing you.
Yeah, absolutely. The question was from Michael, and he said, what findings do you have regarding the impact of video at a learning or course experience level?
Right, yeah, and I think Pete was right on. We really don't have any specific measures yet where we've measured how the video changed the learning process. I think that's the objective, right? But we do have all of these interesting proxy measures on our platform or supporting measures. For instance, we know when videos are being embedded in LMSs and when there are referral links coming from course websites. We're able to look at the usage on our platform, and we can see that in the top 300, 400, 500 films on our platform, that they're getting literally hundreds and hundreds, and if not thousands of views in semester or 6-month periods, meaning that they're being widely distributed for students to use. But really, to echo Pete's comments, the aim and objective of this activity, this project we're undertaking, is to be able to gather some feedback from those students and those faculty deploying those videos in those courses, so we're able to report back to you how it actually helped and benefited the process of delivering that course and delivering that learning outcome. So that's I guess for us now, that's really the holy grail.
Great, very, very interesting. We've got a question here from Erica, or actually, yeah, from Erica, who asked, is this engagement report specific to a product, or is it used across all ASP products?
That's a good question. So, because what we do when we collect the data, we try not to limit the types of reporting that is possible with the data. We just really collect the facts. These are what we call dimensions. You'll see a lot of this, the use of the term dimensions. If you use Google Analytics or some of these other analytic platforms, there's this concept of dimension. And a dimension is really just a fact about the activity that's occurred. What is the title of the item that was used? What subject was it in? What collection was it in? What time of day did it get used? All of these are things that we can know about the engagement. And then we have another type of data that we're collecting called the metrics. These are typically quantitative counts that get summed over time. How often was this title added to a playlist? How often was it cited, et cetera? So once you've collected all your dimensions and your metrics, now you can start to define your reports. And you can combine these dimensions together. So if you were interested in knowing across your entire portfolio, you could use one of our standard reports, or sometimes you can combine some of these things yourself. You can say, I'm just looking at the type of engagement, and I don't care what collection it was in, and look at the titles that were engaged the most. Or you can add a secondary dimension and say, all right, collection is important to me because I want to know, which of my collections are getting the most use. So you just add that as a second dimension. And the reporting sites make this pretty easy to do. We want to even make it easier by putting some of these combinations into canned reports that all you have to do is click on the report title and not have to do any design of the report. But either way, we can get the question answered. And if you think it's important to not include a collection title in these reports, or to include it, then we can use that insight into the design of the reports we make available in January. Our current design has the collection type is just another metric another dimension that you can click on and see that view. And we do it for subject, we do it for publisher, and we do it for the article title or the video title itself.
Great. Yeah. And David, did you want to add to that, or is that, or has Pete covered it?
I think Pete covered it exceptionally well.
I thought that was the case. Yeah. I'll give you the opportunity. All right. Well, it looks like we're coming up on the end of the hour, so I will say thank you to you, Pete, and to you, David, for taking some time this afternoon to talk with us about analytics and the future of user engagement with video. It's been very interesting. And if I could, I'd like to give you a virtual round of applause for a moment here.
Thank you, Mark. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I would also remind folks who are on the line with us that we've recorded the program today, so please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on how to access the archived version. Thank you again to everybody on the line with us. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and I hope that you have an excellent afternoon. Thank you very much.